This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former House Speaker Joe Mavretic, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, and political analyst and lobbyist Jeanne. We've got a great show for you this week, beginning with the suggestion that perhaps we should shutter some of our public universities. A new jobs report showing unemployment has increased, and we ask what we can do about it. And we talk about tax reform, and then, if we get time, a proposal to eliminate motorcycle helmets. Let's get started. When Governor McCrory rolled out his budget proposals, they included a reduction of $139 million to the University of North Carolina system. Pete Brunstetter, co-chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, responded by saying he wasn't as concerned about how many dollars were spent as to how the dollars in higher education were being spent, adding that lawmakers want to eliminate duplicative programs across the system. Brunstetter said, "I think our members definitely envision that there could be some consolidation between campuses, and we might need to go from 16 down to 14, 15, 14, something like that." Well, as you would expect, this set off an immediate protest from students and university advocates alike, but Hannah Gage, former chair of the UNC Board of Governors, said, "A discussion of downsizing, repurposing, or redesigning parts of the university is not inappropriate, but the topic is complex, nuanced, and not just one of economics, and needs to be done in a balanced, thoughtful way that truly serves the state and its people. It needs to be done outside of politics as much as possible, and therein lies the danger of having it now." John, in times past when budget cuts were discussed, the university often threatened to have to eliminate campuses or at least popular programs. Now legislators are threatening to shut down or consolidate campuses. Tell us what's going on. Don't you think this is interesting?
It is. It's certainly not a new idea. I well remember back in the early 90s when Speaker Mavretic was in charge in the House and the Senate, and Governor Jim Martin were dealing with the budget deficit. There was discussion then of looking at campus reduction or campus consolidation. It happened again during the early Easley administration. So every time you have a budget crisis, and we're of course not in one now, but we just came out of one, this issue comes up. And typically, again, people kind of immediately react to it and, oh no, they're going to shut down UNC Charlotte or something. Usually what this conversation's about are communities, fairly small communities where you have a UNC campus and you have a community college. And the idea is that you might merge those two institutions together. The example that often comes up is Elizabeth City State University and the community college is there. Fayetteville sometimes comes up. I'm not saying I necessarily think it would save a lot of money or would even be a good idea, but that's typically what they're talking about. But people immediately jump to different kinds of conclusions, like an entire campus would be shut down and nothing would be happening there. More likely, if this idea ever got any legs, it would be converting one of the smaller UNC campuses into a community college or something like that.
Jeanne, you hang out a lot over on Jones Street. Are they seriously talking about this, or is this just a straw man that's being proposed?
Well, it's hard to tell because Senator Berger came out immediately and said that people were overreacting to what Brunstetter said. So it's hard to tell, but I think John's right that they certainly would like to talk about doing some types of consolidations, maybe where in the past there's been agreements where two schools wouldn't have an MBA program, for example, and now they have those programs. They might like to talk about some of those mergers. But I think Hannah Gage is incorrect. It's a complicated issue. It might require a little bit more study than senators and others just, kind of putting the idea out there.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's go to John's point. If this discussion's been going on for some time, what criteria would be used? He mentioned small numbers of students, but I mean, you could look at the condition of the physical facilities. You could look at the graduation rates, the duplication of programs, any number of different factors.
Well, I think you really have to start off looking at leadership, Tom. I recall this issue quite well from 89 and 90. I think the first thing that you have to do is to look at the racial bias and the gender bias at the chancellors in the 16 ranked universities. If you look at the top half of those 16 ranked universities, what you see is all white. A few of the campuses have had female chancellors, but the University at Chapel Hill, for example, has never had anything but a white male as the chancellor. If you look at the bottom third of those universities, the chancellors are all black. Now, if you wanted to honestly approach diversity, what you would do with a new chancellor at Chapel Hill, if they want to be a regional leader, is to have a black female as the next chancellor. And if that were the case, then you could make some moves within the system on other campuses. But until you seriously address the issue of race in the leadership of those 16 campuses, you're not going to have a whole lot of change.
Chris, I mean, let's set this stool on its own legs. Is this just code language for going after the historically black universities? Because these are the ones, frankly, that I think that if they were going to make some consolidations or changes would be the ones that they would go after.
Well, I certainly think that's the fear among supporters of the black universities and the public university system at large. Look, I don't think any university is going to be closed this year. No university campus is going to be closed next year. Senator Apodaca, one of the more powerful members of the Senate, said as much in his local paper because he's worried about the universities in Western North Carolina, UNC Asheville and Western. He said there might be some consolidation of programs. I think that's where this thing is really going. The larger point, though, is that these schools that you mentioned, the historically black colleges and universities, I remember when I was in Dan Blue's office right after Joe was Speaker, and we asked for a capital expenditure report at the time of what facilities had been built in the last 15 years. And they gave us a sheet. I think Chapel Hill at the time, these are rough figures, was $380 million had been spent. NC State was $280. NC Central had $5 million of capital construction. In 15 years, there was mold in the dorms, if you remember at that time. So we have never adequately supported these universities. Many of them serve a very different role. They serve a very important role in the community. They serve a very important role in giving people education. And, you know, all duplication is not bad. We probably need more than one place training teachers. We need more than one place training biotech people. So it's a very complicated discussion. I think Hannah Gage is probably right, but it's very difficult to do this. When think about everything that we've ever expanded, it's all politics. Where we're going to put a med school? Where's the next pharmacy school going to go to? How in the world are we going to have a decision on which one to close?
Yeah. John, some of the supporters of the university say the Republicans are waging a war against the university system. You think that's the case?
Well, if they do that, they will lose. I suspect they won't do that. There are disagreements about how the universities have in the past been spending money, and you'll notice the university system is actually embracing and discussing that issue, and they are changing their strategy over time, looking at duplication of effort, looking at rewarding outcomes in the system rather than simply paying per capita according to how many students you enroll, and it doesn't matter whether they graduate in 5 or 6 years. So there are changes going on that are moving universities, not just in North Carolina, by the way, but around the country, moving them towards a model that many conservatives and Republicans argued for 15, 20 years. Now it's happening because of fiscal realities, not so much because of politics.
I would agree with John on this. I keep saying on this show from time to time that we ought to take a real lesson from Clemson University. The Board of Trustees at Clemson years ago said, this is the cap. We're not going to have any more students here. If we capped, let's say, the 3 largest universities in the system and said, okay, these caps are going to stay in place until the other campuses come up and reach fulfillment. And if we want to have more student spaces, we're going to have them in those campuses, not those 3 capped campuses. I think that would be in everybody's best interest.
I want to add one other thing. I talked actually to UNC President Tom Ross this past week about this topic, and he made an interesting point, which is it's not a sure thing, and John referred to this, that we would automatically save a lot of money necessarily by closing a small campus because you have the facilities. What do you do with them if they're in disrepair? If the students still go to a different place, we're still paying the portion of that their tuition is paid. It's not an obvious thing that you say we'll close Campus X and we'll save $100 million and we can use that for other needs. And of course, it would devastate the community. That's another factor.
It also goes to the point that we're a growing state. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. We're one of the most.
But enrollments have slightly declined across the system. Isn't that right, Jeanne?
Yes, and I think, part of this is what the strategic plan that the Board of Governors is working on, which McCrory does support in his budget, a lot of these issues are things that are supposed to be discussed as part of that planning process.
No doubt we'll be discussing it again before this is all over and done with. Where can you go if you want to watch an NC Spin show you missed? Or if you just want to go back to see if one of our panelists really said what you thought they heard, what they said. There are 3 ways you can see NC Spin. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, visit us on Facebook, or watch us at NC Spin on YouTube. Well, I get to jump on other viewers. We posted this week's show on Thursday afternoon, so you can always watch when you want to watch. ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, or NC Spin on YouTube. See you there.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Before NC lawmakers tackle immigration reform, they need to understand it's a billion-dollar issue. State legislatures in Georgia and Alabama have passed stringent laws that have decimated their agribusiness economy, leaving crops in the field to die and costing their farmers millions of dollars in lost revenue. Before we hurt our farmers, let's think about a responsible immigration policy that works. Prosperous farms create good jobs right here at home. Paid for by NC Farm Bureau.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch a Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthierNC.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
We keep hearing that job creation is the #1 task for our leaders, but we're not much better off than we were a year ago. In fact, in January, the unemployment number showed our rate at 9.5%, higher than the month before, and considerably higher than the 7.7% national rate. The problem is our population is growing faster than the number of jobs that are being created. Joe, help us understand here. We're tied for the 4th highest unemployment rate in the nation. People keep flocking to North Carolina. Do they know something we don't?
Well, no, I think that it's really an apples and oranges issue, Tom. If you look at growth in North Carolina is coming really from births, from people who move here who are, let's say, over 50, and people who come here with jobs with corporations that are moving into North Carolina. When you look at the jobless rate or the unemployment rate, you're really looking at a snapshot of a statistical model. I've never put a whole lot of faith in the 0.7s or the 0.3s. I think if you round them off to 7%, 8%, 9%, you'll be a whole lot better off. So I don't think it's in Congress to say that we're kind of flat on changing the unemployment rate, and I think it's clear that we are growing.
John, one of the things that came out in some of this discussion is that the job growth we are seeing is coming in the service sector. Mm-hmm. And the service sector pays an average of $19.65 an hour. In contrast, goods-producing jobs pay $23 an hour, and the state average wage is $20 an hour. So not only have we got more people unemployed, but those finding jobs are not earning as much. Per capita income is $37,000. We're 38th in the nation. This kind of looks like triple jeopardy for us in North Carolina, doesn't it?
Indeed, that per capita trend is not a new thing. If you go back and look since about 98, 99, and you adjust for inflation, our per capita income has actually not gone up at all. It's, depending upon how you measure it, it's declined slightly or been essentially flat. That's a bad sign, obviously. You can't argue that North Carolina's economy has been doing great and is doing great now if we have a relatively high unemployment rate combined with the weak per capita income growth. Right. And you also have to expand out. You know, we have a lot of different surveys or a lot of different questions we ask that generate different measurements of labor market utilization. The broadest measure is called the U6 rate. It includes people who are working part-time, who would like to work full-time. It includes people who have stopped looking for work and unemployed. If you add all those folks together, North Carolina's rate is a little over 16%, which is shocking. However, that is actually quite a bit less than it used to be. So that tells you actually the unemployment rate is partly the issues that we were talking about, influx in, the people looking for jobs, but partly the slight uptick recently in unemployment rate is probably people who had been previously discouraged who are now back in the job market and thinking they can find a job.
Jeanne, Mark Vittner, who's an economist with Wells Fargo, says he doesn't think our unemployment rate is going to drop much more than 0.3 to 0.4% by year's end. Now, if we remember, Governor McCrory came into office saying that he wanted, at the end of his first year, North Carolina's unemployment rate to be lower than South Carolina's. Well, right now, South Carolina's is 8.7%, almost a full point lower than ours. What are we going to have to do in order to be able to meet McCrory's goal?
Well, we're clearly flatlining. When you look at the graph, it's flat. His budget, he cut the North Carolina Rural Center and he cut NC Biotech. NC Biotech is a job creator. He cut 2 programs in his budget that create jobs, that have the statistical evidence. I mean, we all know biotechnology is a growing field. They need to look at some programs for startups and for entrepreneurs. And I'm going to go back to my usual statement that we have these licenses at universities and we have startups and entrepreneurs and tech transfer trying to make new businesses work that hire people. And we have a whole community of them in Durham and Raleigh. And they've got to look, the feds are looking at some tax credits for those groups. We've got to be a little bit more proactive in some ways. We're going to help businesses and help create jobs.
And Chris, another wrinkle of this whole story is that the job growth that we are getting is coming in Charlotte and Raleigh and Greensboro and Winston-Salem and Asheville and Wilmington, and the rural areas of our state, as Jeanne was saying a moment ago, are just getting further and further and further behind. Any evidence of what we can do there?
Well, I mean, I think there's several things going on here. One is, I think it is worth noting that, in 2011, we heard a lot of speeches on the floor that the Republican budget and tax cuts would create all these jobs and get us out of this economic hole. The truth is that wasn't true then, and that state leaders can't do much in a year or 2 or 3 or 4 to transform a state's economy. A lot of that is national. A lot of that has to do with world events and global events and all the other things. The second thing is, we've talked about on the show many times, a lot of the folks unemployed in North Carolina are not college graduates looking for work. They're 52-year-old people who used to work in a small textile mill and got laid off 4 years ago and don't have a high school education or a community college education. It's pretty darn hard to be retrained for a high-skilled job when you're 52 and worked in a mill for 20 years.
And it's not only that, but what we're learning is that, John, many of these people don't have full-time jobs. They have a couple or 3, maybe even part-time jobs. Employers aren't hiring full-time employees. What's got to happen? Is Jeanne right? Have we got to incentivize employees to hire these people?
Partly. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why businesses are still skittish to expand their full-time employment. They have a lot of concerns. Most of them are national. As Chris was saying, a lot of this is an international and national story, and it's manifesting itself here. But a lot of these companies are still nervous about the monetary expansion. Maybe they think that's going to lead to another bust at some point. They're nervous about a variety of things happening in the national economy, and they just don't have the confidence yet. They've got, hiring new people, opening a new plant, opening a new location is a risk, and they don't think right now that it's worth taking a risk. You've got to incentivize risk taking.
All right, next up, tax reform. We'll get to it after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Not all high school graduates go to college. Not all employers need college graduates. Are North Carolina's public schools preparing graduates with the skills employers need now? Join the discussion. Visit nceducate.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
The talk about tax reform has abated somewhat recently as legislative discussions are being held behind closed doors, and we hear that they're going to include reductions in personal and corporate income taxes while adding the number of services that are being taxed. In one curious move, the Senate Finance Committee debated the repeal of the corporate franchise tax and wanted to replace it with a business privilege tax. Cities are protesting the almost $70 million a year in revenue they'll lose, and businesses say the $500 million privilege tax won't fly. Chris, we thought this idea was dead, and we question why it was suggested at all, but especially why it was not presented as part of a package with other tax reform proposals. Tell us what's going on.
Well, I think what's going on is you're seeing all sorts of bits and pieces. You saw some Senator Bob Rucho, sort of the driving force for tax reform in the Senate, come out with a couple plans this week. I think you'll see more tax reform. I think you'll see a very, in my view, unwise and radical reform to completely eliminate the personal and corporate income tax and try to replace that revenue by increasing taxes on 50 or 60% of the bottom taxpayers in North Carolina, which I think would be a dastardly deed. But when it all shakes out, I think what you'll see this session, whether it's wise or not, is a small reduction in the personal and corporate income tax, maybe phase in a larger reduction. The real question on the table is, A, is it going to raise enough money to meet the essential needs of North Carolina, which I'm not sure that that's true, and B, if they're going to be anywhere near revenue neutral. Remember, we're at a low point in spending as part of the state's economy in 40 years. But where's the money going to come from to make it revenue neutral? Are they going to close loopholes? Are they going to raise taxes on other people? Are they going to cut some programs? I mean, we don't know. We know the philosophy. We don't know the specifics.
Well, and Jeanne, so far as it goes, Senator Rucho's plans was sort of dribbled out to us a little bit. We still didn't get the full effect of what's going to go on there. But what we did see were they're going to try to, over a period of a couple of years, phase in personal income tax reductions down to a maximum of 4%. It's now 7.75. Senator Berger's staff said that this bill was just a placeholder. If that's the case, why even trot it out?
Well, I don't believe that we're going to have comprehensive tax reform. I'm going to go with what the Rules Chairman in the House said, Tim Moore, which is it's so big, and I don't see the House doing a lot on this at all, that we may have little bits and pieces, and that may be a study of something to come later. But I don't think we're going to see a huge comprehensive plan.
One of the things they're talking about, we currently tax about 30 services in this state. Now, they're talking about possibly increasing that to as many as 130 services. And they're going to include things like hairdressers and barbers and lawn care and painters and so forth like that. How difficult is it going to be to collect this stuff?
Well, it would be very difficult, but I think we're all missing the point here. And I think the General Assembly leadership is playing the media just like they should. Look, when you have...
Just like they should, huh?
Absolutely. When you look at an issue this big and you think, well, what's the strategy and the tactics? Chris been there. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. What you do is you roll out a whole lot of things, like we did with Alex Hall, and then you wait for all the reactions and the press and the media and all this kind of stuff to go on, and that's the way you take the temperature. That's the way you understand where's the big problems coming from, where are the little people that's going to roll over, how are we going to do this, put it together. And I think the franchise and license tax privilege tax is exactly the case in point.
Just sort of a straw man.
Exactly. They want to see who's going to do what. When you get on that privilege tax, you get all the 500 cities and coming in here saying, oh, this is horrible, horrible. You figure out where all the stuff is, and then you say, okay, now let's make the moves. Isn't that the way it happens?
John, one of the things that I think we're going to have to watch very carefully is when we're talking about taxing services. And we've had this discussion before, but never before have we gotten into taxing professional services like lawyers and doctors and CPAs and groups like that. From what you know and understand, are they talking about bringing them in the umbrella of taxing services, or will the lobbyists prevail and keep them from being taxed?
Well, let's be clear. If Joe's going to be all, carefully and analytical of the perverse incentives of the system, then I'll explain it this way. Lobbyists for the professions love this talk because it justifies their existence.
Absolutely.
And they will effectively but expensively fight off all these proposals to expand the sales tax to include rich people and their professional income. Now, you might pick off barbers, but I wouldn't try it too hard myself. I personally think that this is a good actually, what we're seeing, Joe, are the pieces that might actually get some action. I don't think the sales tax expansion is where the real action is, but it's gotten a lot of attention early on. The real action is in reforming the income tax and in reforming business tax. There are lots of businesses in North Carolina that hate the franchise tax a lot more than the income tax.
Final question, Chris, very quickly. The House says they're going to roll out a plan. We saw part of the Senate plan this week. The governor's saying he's going to come up with a plan. How difficult is it going to be to get everybody together and compromise and find any kind of solution?
Oh, I think it'll be very difficult, but I think what will happen is you'll get all these things in the room. You'll find a few things in common. They'll pass those the first year, and they'll work on the rest of it later.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about motorcycle helmets.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch a Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthierNC.com.
North Carolina has an estimated 200,000 motorcyclists and one of the most stringent helmet laws in the nation. Legislation recently introduced would eliminate the law that requires motorcycle riders to have helmets if they've got at least $10,000 in medical insurance. Jeanne, proponents of this bill say it's a freedom of choice matter, and statistics show the 31 states that don't have helmet laws don't have fatality rates much different from ours. But Florida passed a similar bill as the one being proposed, and fatality rates actually doubled. What's your position on this?
Well, accidents are accidents. If they're crazy enough not to wear a helmet, I don't know what to say. I mean, it is a personal freedom choice, but I would wear a helmet when I ride it because the chances of having serious brain injury are there no matter what. So I don't know why we're spending time on this issue.
Anybody got any different opinions about this?
You know, I have several friends who are serious bikers, and all of them say to me, get rid of the helmets. And I say to them, okay, if we get rid of the helmets and you have an accident, I want you to pay for it. I don't want my insurance premiums to go up.
Well, I got a friend that down east that's a motorcycle. He said there are two kind of motorcycle drivers, those that have had accidents and those that are going to. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give us your feedback and read the column. Visit us at ncspin.com or ncspin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.